All right, so using the same techniques that we've just been using all along, I've added a few more kind of smaller shapes around the outside of our focal point here, which is the phone. So you guys, there's no right or wrong way to really do this. I've shown you the steps, I've shown you the techniques, but it does help to add a little bit of variation in size by, playing around with the scale, the opacity, and the placement. But you can see that it does add something nice to our image here. And at this point, I've built up about 23 shapes. Again, just using the same methods that we've been using all along. And, it really helps add some depth. So from here, what I want to do is go ahead and create a new layer and then switch over to your gradient tool, which is just G on your keyboard. And then what we're going to do is, if you haven't done this already, press D on your keyboard so you have your default black and white colors. Press X to switch over to black. And then what we're going to do is just change this color to maybe a shade of, like orange red, somewhere in the middle there. All right, something like that. FF5400. Seems like a good color. All right, so what I'm going to do here is just click and drag outwards to create a radial gradient. And then once that's created, I'm going to show you guys how we can kind of add a nice color overlay. Okay, so now that we have our gradient, I'm going to go ahead and play around with some of these blending modes. Multiply is usually pretty dark, but I like color dodge and linear dodge. I think those can be pretty nice. And you just want to experiment and see what happens with the different blending modes as you go along. So soft light's not too bad either. For now, I think let's try color dodge and see what this does. You kind of move it around and see that it adds like a hot kind of tint to our image. This one may be a bit too strong still, so let's go back to soft light. See about that one. I'm just laying it kind of over the lens flare. You can see it adds like a tint of that red to it, which is kind of cool. But experiment here with this and the placement of it. Maybe it actually looks pretty good on the lower part of the phone, but we don't need it to be quite so intense. All right, so I'm just going to lower the opacity of that to maybe 50%, but you can see it adds a little bit of difference in value there. And you can also feel free to experiment with the size of this gradient as well. You may not want it to extend too far into the background. Maybe you just want it in a couple of spots on the phone itself. So go ahead and press Command or Control plus J on your keyboard to make a duplicate of that layer. And then we're going to put another one just somewhere up here in the upper right corner. So for this one, you can see how it looks if you have it at 100% versus 40%. It is quite a noticeable difference. But the stronger opacity actually looks pretty good here. So I'm going to leave it at about 70%. Put these two into a group folder and just call them radial gradients. And we're going to do the same thing essentially over our background layer. So scroll down to where we have our vignetted background layer here and add a new layer just above it. And then what we're going to do is create one more radial gradient just like we did previously. And just click and drag outwards towards the edge of your canvas. And now we have kind of the same thing happening in the background. It's a nice overlay kind of happening here. I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt Option at the same time as I drag outwards. And all that does is drag it and scale it from the center. If I were to just hold down Shift and drag, you can see it drags it from the bottom right corner. But what we want to do is drag it from the center so that all the sides are extending at the same time. So that's a nice little shortcut that you can try out. Okay, color dodge, linear dodge, try overlay. And again, it's just about experimenting and playing around. I actually think, overlay looks pretty good, but it kind of darkens the background a little bit too much, perhaps. So maybe we can try overlay, but just, 50% instead of 100%. And it's not about making the background dark. It's just about, kind of showing these colors or just, permeating through here. And, you don't want to see all these colors just in one spot. But you know, those type of things really help to add a lot to the image and help sell it. So you know, feel free to play around with that as much as you'd like. Excuse me. So at this point, what we've done is add another radial gradient to the background. And you can then, you know, play around with the size, the placement, as well as the actual blending modes like we've been doing here. So screen, you can see it gets really kind of blown out. Color dodge. Color sometimes works pretty well too. It's a little more subtle, but I like it. And you know, you can see how it looks. Maybe it's on top. I just thought it would look good in the background. So you know, see what works best for you. Yeah, so now when I add this on top, it just totally colorizes the entire phone, which we don't want. Overlay makes it really, really red. Color dodge, again, linear dodge, screen. These are all, you know, the blending modes that I tend to use a lot in my own work, but, you know, sometimes you might try something that just looks really good and you might just do it by accident. So I definitely encourage you guys to play around with that. And it is actually a good way to add some color to your work without just painting it in. I do tend to use, you know, radial gradients quite often. So say, for example, we wanted to add, you know, like a vibrant yellow color here. So what I would do then, just go to my gradients and make sure that it's just changing from foreground to transparent, just like that. All right, so that way it'll just be a nice faded kind of gradient. And again, play around with the blending modes to see what kind of result you get. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you never know. It's quite a nice effect. I mean, you can see what's happening down here. And if you're not actually happy with the color, rather than scrapping it and making a new one, what I like to do is hold down Alt or the Alt Option key on your keyboard, and then add a hue saturation adjustment layer. You can select Use Previous Layer to create mask, and then what you're going to do is move around the hue slider, and that will change the color of your gradient. So right now, you know, you've got kind of the orange yellow thing going on. You might want to add some blue, or you might want to keep it all, you know, pretty uniform. The yellow isn't necessarily bad, but I think it was just a little bit too strong. It was almost taking away from our colors and the vibrance of it. But you can see just doing this, you can quickly get a feel for what colors might or may not work with your composition. So I think something around there is pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that, and then maybe reduce the opacity a little bit to 50% or something. Right? Toggle the layer on and off, and you can see what's happening, where it's affecting the image the most. It is adding a bit too much red, but the key is, you know, the subtlety. We've already established our color palette here, so we don't want to completely overwrite it. What I'm going to do now is just grab both of these layers and drag them down to the new layer icon at the bottom of the palette, and then just move it around and see, you know, what this might look like in another part of our image. Raise the opacity back up if you're having trouble kind of seeing what's happening. You know, it really doesn't take much. I mean, maybe you want it to go here, reduce the opacity a little bit, something like that. And it just adds a little bit of color to the light, so it's not pure white. This way it just helps drive it home even more. Alright, so I'm going to select these 4 layers, hold down the Shift key, and then drop them into our radial gradients folder, where we have these 2 other gradients that we made before. Okay. Let's just go ahead and turn those off real quick so we can see what happened. We added that one on top, and that one on the lower portion. So it is pretty subtle, and then when you turn them all on and off, you can see how adding that little bit of brightness there is kind of nice addition to our image. And if you want, you can actually control the opacity of the entire folder as well, rather than the individual elements. So if you're feeling like, maybe it's a bit too strong, I've just lowered it to about 50%. Okay, so what we're going to do from here is just go ahead and add another new layer. And this time we are going to go to our shape tool, the rectangle tool, and you can, click and hold over it, and come down here to the custom shape tool. All right, so now you'll notice up here along the top in the toolbar, you have a menu, which you can go and select any of these shapes, or you can, load some presets. But what we're looking for is just some basic shapes or symbols, maybe even, like a hexagon or something like that, which I don't see automatically. So let's just go ahead and hit append, because we want to add it rather than replace it. And here we go. Now we have some more interesting shapes to play around with. So maybe we want to try a triangle or a diamond. But for now, let's use the hexagon shape and see what that looks like. Hit X on your keyboard so that you have a white foreground color, and then hold down the Shift key and drag. So what this is basically a vector shape, which is nice because you can scale it up or scale it down, and it'll still have some nice sharp edges. But I think the line itself is a little bit too thick, but we can always fix that later. For now, I'm just going to rasterize it because we are going to keep it pretty small. All right, maybe rotate it a little bit, and just adding a couple of unique shapes to our design here, so it's not all just circles and rings and that kind of thing. But it makes it's something special that you can add to it. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and maybe add another one. And again, free transform and then just rotate it a little bit. Then we're going to hold down Control, click on the layer, and rasterize the layer. And what we can do, if we feel that it's a bit too thick, like right now the line is pretty heavy, so something that I'm going to try is make a duplicate of it by pressing Command or Control plus J on the keyboard. Then hold down the Command key and click on the layer thumbnail, and you can see that you now have a selection. So I'm going to switch back to my other color, which is yellow, so that way I can see, you can clearly see the two. So press Command Control plus T to once again initiate a free transform command, and then hold down both the Shift and Alt Option keys together and drag inwards from any of these four corners. And now you can see that it's reduced the size of this top shape from the center, so it's equal on all sides. And what I want to do now is again click on the layer thumbnail, turn this layer off, go to my previous layer, and click on the layer mask icon. So now that just thinned it out for us, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so that's just the way that I do it. I know there's probably 100 ways that you could have done that, but that's the one that I chose to go with right now. So I'm just going to rotate it a little bit more. I want it to be exactly the same as the other shape. Something like that. Let's see, maybe a bit more of an angle. And then just reduce it a little more. There you go. All right, and again, feel free to play around with the opacity here. Does it look good small? Is that too small? Or should it be, big and bold like we had it before? Again, it's entirely up to you. I think that this one might actually look better. A little bit smaller and lighter, something like that. It kind of mimics what we have happening with our rings, just in terms of the lightness of it. All right. And once you have that, you can play around with it. We have the same thing happening over here, but I think this one stands out a little bit too much now, so I'm just going to reduce the opacity down to about 30%. All right, bring that over. And just by adding these little touches, it's just something that makes it even more unique and special. Okay, so these aren't exactly rings. We'll just call them hexagons for now. And that's pretty much it. So I think at this point, our image is looking really good. And to add a finishing touch, what you could do if you would like is, maybe a little bit of dodging and burning or overall sharpening, which I will show you guys in the next lesson.